Good morning. Here we are in Leviticus 6, and we're going to go into 7. We're going to try and cover some ground today. But what's kind of cool with that is I noted this morning, yes, that we have hit this place where we are tied up with the Robert Murray McShane reading plan, if you're watching this live the day we do it. So let's just hit the ground running. Starting in verse 8, we break it up because really chapter 5 flows into chapter 6 verse 7, and you know, it's worth noting, I think it was the 14th and 15th centuries. The 14th century they added chapters, the 15th century they added verses, but it's just always that good reminder for us that chapters and verses are not inspired. At least I don't think they are, unless they were inspired way later. But that's to help us understand that sometimes, you know, and quite often, you know, Book of Acts and other places, I always feel like, man, like why is this one verse not with the previous chapter? So as you study your Bible, don't think that the whole story ends at the end of the big number. Verse 8, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command Aaron and his son, saying, this is the law of the burnt offering. And so, really, a lot of this is recapping stuff. And so, I'm going to try and hit the new information. But we've already covered this in the previous week. So, he talks about the burnt offering, and he says it's going to be burnt on the altar, and the fire of the altar shall be kept burning on it. And so, this is the idea is that this altar with the burnt offering, he burns it all. And so, he has got to keep that fire going until that offering is totally consumed. And so it talks about him, the priest shall put on his linen garment, his linen trousers, shall put on his body, take the ashes of the burnt offering, which the fire has consumed on the altar. He shall put them beside the altar. Then he shall take off his garments, put on other garments, and carry them outside the camp to a clean place. So basically, this altar is fully consumed. And unlike other offerings where like everything would get burnt, because you're doing bones and all with this one, there's going to be some leftover stuff that you're going to have ashes. So you got to take that and dispose of it. But it says, the fire on the altar shall be kept burning on it. That fire never goes out. Verse 13, it says, a fire shall always be burning on the altar. It never goes out. Kind of makes me want to flip ahead real quick. Oh, yeah. In chapter 9, in the last verse, what we find is that God supernaturally lights that fire. Fire will come out from the tabernacle in a couple chapters and start the fire on the altar. And so, really, what it is that fire that God has started, they're not supposed to let it go out. They're supposed to keep it burning. God starts the fire, they keep that fire alive. So, the grain offering is a pretty straightforward repeat of the stuff we've been reading. It talks about Aaron and his sons reading it, right? How the grain offering is not given with leaven. It says in verse 17, I have given as their portion my offerings made by fire. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the trespass offering, right? And so the grain offering was for service, where the burnt offering was symbolic of basically total consecration, giving your all to God. The grain offering was symbolic of your service. It's offered with oil and with incense, which is pictures of the Holy Spirit and of prayer. And so there's the next offerings. And then there's a daily grain offering now. This is a little addition, verse 19. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this is the offering of Aaron and his sons, which they shall offer to the Lord, beginning on the day when he's anointed, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour as a daily grain offering, half it in the morning, half it at night. And it shall be in a pan with oil when it's mixed. Bring it, baked in pieces of grain offering, you shall offer for a sweet aroma to the Lord. The priests and from among his sons who are anointed in this place shall offer it. It's a statute forever to the Lord. It shall be wholly burned. And so every day the priests come in the morning and they come in the evening. They're serving the Lord in the morning. They're serving the Lord in the evening. Again, those grain offerings being a picture of service. Now we're going out of order from what we did in these first few chapters of Leviticus in here with the sin offering. Now, it's worth noting that the sin offering, the priests eat of the sin offerings. This is part of how the priests made an income and how they were fed was they would eat part of the offerings. And really, it's the burnt offering, the whole burnt offering, where everything gets burned. The priest doesn't get to eat any of it. But it mentions here that the priest who offers it shall eat of it, and that everything that touches it must be holy. And here's an interesting thing. It says, the earthen vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. And if it is boiled in a bronze pot, it shall be scoured and rinsed with water. Now, here's the idea here, is that anything made of clay, it will absorb some of it. But if it's made of a metal, like bronze, it won't. And so anything brought in clay must be broken. And what's cool is that today you can still go to Shiloh, where the tabernacle stood in Israel, and there are pieces of broken pots all over the place. Because as people brought these sacrifices, if they did it in clay, which is what most people would have, then they had to break the pot when it was done. So you can go there and still see that. Now, chapter 7, it just kind of continues on with this thought that started back in 6:8. Likewise, for a trespass offering, right? They bring it, they kill it, they give all the pieces that were already prescribed in the last section, the fat and the fatty tail and whatnot, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver. Every male among the priests may eat of it, in verse 6. So again, we see the priests are eating it. The priest who makes atonement with it shall have it. And so, again, we just see that the priests, as they intercede for the people, they get to have a portion of what is brought to help provide for them. And so this was kind of like, it was their pay. And if you actually look at the percentages the priests got, they actually had a pretty healthy pay when they looked at the portion that they got a little of the tithe, they got a little of the food, and that was what they got for serving the Lord. Now here's where in the peace offerings, now we get some more of that extra information. If you remember, when I did the peace offering of chapter 3, I couldn't remember, I was telling you guys stuff, and I couldn't remember, where is that written? Well, it's here in chapter 7, and I couldn't remember where the extra information was that I was sharing. And so he offers it as a thanksgiving. Interesting, that's Todah. If you've been to Israel, Todah is thank you. And so it's a Todah offering. It's a thanksgiving offering, a peace offering. And so they give these unleavened cakes. Now notice this. Besides the cakes as his offering, he shall offer leavened bread with the sacrifice of thanksgiving of his peace offering. So now what's interesting is that there is the peace offering and the unleavened bread, but the Feast of Weeks, which is in chapter 23, during that offering, they bring leavened cakes. And it's worth noting, in fact, actually part of a Passover Seder. If you were going to go to a Passover Seder and you were going to be partake in it with the Jewish people there, right, as they do it, one of the things that they do is the youngest child or the least distinguished guest, which is usually the youngest child, is the idea. They are given the role of asking a question, which is, so they ask a few questions. Why on this night do we eat only meat that is cooked by fire instead of boiled? Why does this night do we eat bitter herbs instead of sweet herbs and other herbs? And why on this night do we eat unleavened bread when on other nights we eat leavened or unleavened? I just bring this out here because once again, it's funny to see the weird heresies that float around the church, but I've seen people, thinking that leaven is bad to eat. And it's like, well, there's a symbolism in the Bible to teach us a lesson, but the Jewish people ate leavened bread every other part of the year. And they even offer up leavened bread as part of the Feast of Weeks, Shavuot, that's Pentecost. For us Christians who speak Christianese, it's Pentecost. They offered up leavened bread. So there's nothing wrong with leaven, but it does have a symbolic meaning of sin. So that's why we have this unleavened bread in so many other places. But they offer it all up, and in verse 15 is where it says it must be eaten of the same day. The same day they must eat of the bread and the food that they bring. And the reason is because they're supposed to be doing it together. You bring the sacrifice, and you need to bring enough people to eat the sacrifice. What's fascinating is if it's a different kind of vow, if it's a vow or a voluntary offering in verse 16. Now, this is not a peace offering, which was also voluntary, but it was like a specific voluntary offering. The word in verse 16 for vow, it's the same word we use for Nazirite, like Samson or Samuel or any of the other guys who had that Nazirite vow. So the idea of a vow. Paul the Apostle, when we read the book of Acts, as he's leaving Corinth, he cuts his hair and he's trying to get back to Jerusalem in a hurry because he probably did a Nazirite vow or a vow very similar to a Nazirite vow, and they would shave their head and then they'd let their hair grow during the duration of the vow. And when the vow was over, they'd cut their hair again, and the length of your hair kind of showed how long you held the vow for, and then you offered your hair up as an offering to God. Burnt hair. Nothing smells quite like it. And so obviously, and then if you ever break your vow, you have to cut your hair again. My problem is I'm always touching unclean things, so I have to shave my head like every day. So I don't have a whole lot to offer, it seems. So the remainder of the flesh must be burnt on the third day with fire. Verse 17, basically saying if you don't eat it all, you can have this celebration with people, and you're going to share in the meat, all the people. So only in these voluntary and peace offerings do the people share in the meat. Otherwise, the priests get it all, or what's not offered as a sacrifice. And so they say on the third day, if it's a voluntary, on the secondary day, if it's peace offering, everything that's left is burned. So if you guys don't share in it, then it just goes to the Lord. There's probably a deeper lesson in that too. I'm sure there is. Just the idea that God is offering all this stuff, and if the people don't take it, they don't take it, And so it's God always has all these things available for us. All right, we got a bunch of verses to finish up, so I'm going to move kind of quickly because I'd like to start chapter 8 tomorrow and actually be in sync with the McShane reading plan. That's just kind of fun. So, in short, though, it says if anyone's going to eat of these offerings and they're going to come and partake, they need to be clean. The flesh that touches anything unclean shall not be eaten. It shall be burned with fire. And the person who eats the sacrifice, while unclean, he's going to get cut off from his people. It's holy people gathering together in holiness to worship a holy God. That's the message. Now, fat and blood may not be eaten. Now, that's the verse 22 to 27, in short summarizes that they can't eat the fat or the blood. Now, why? Well, the blood is what makes the atonement for them. And the fat belongs to the Lord. We read that in numerous places. The fat belongs to the Lord. I could back up and give you the actual verse. But that's the idea, is the fat belongs to the Lord. And so we're not supposed to take what's God's. And fat, I guess, is glorious. Some of us are more glorious than others. But the fat belongs to the Lord. So the people aren't supposed to eat it. That's the short version. I don't think they had to sit there and trim every tiny little last piece of intramuscular fat out of their meat. But the main idea was the bigger chunks of fat, those got burned on the altar and they belonged to God. And it wasn't for the people to take. And then lastly, the portion for Aaron and his sons. So speaking of the high priest, it says that they offer a peace offering in verse 29. All right, the people bring it. They bring it, and the fat with the breast he brings, and the breast is waved as a wave offering. The priest shall burn the fat on the altar, but the breast shall be Aaron's and his sons. And then the right thigh in verse 32. It's a heave offering. So wave offerings, they did this. Heave offerings, they did this. If you're curious, what's the difference between a wave offering and a heave offering? Now you know. And so these pieces get to go to Aaron and his sons. Verse 35 says, this is the consecrated portion for Aaron and his sons from the offerings made by fire to the Lord on the day that Moses presented them to minister to the Lord as priests. The Lord commanded this to be given to them and the children of Israel on the day that he anointed them by statute forever throughout their generations. This is the law of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, trespass offering, the consecrations, the sacrifice of the peace offering, which the Lord commanded Moses on Mount Sinai, and the day when he commanded the children of Israel to offer their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai. And so now we see a split. My Bible even says check out a cross-reference of Exodus 29 right here. But from chapters 1 to 7, we looked at the offerings. And now starting tomorrow in chapter 8, we're looking at the offerers, the mediators, the priests. And so now we've looked at what is being offered. Starting tomorrow, we're going to look at who is doing the offering. So there we go. All right. Ooh, Leviticus 3:15, Carlos. Was that the fat belongs to the Lord? I actually flipped back to Leviticus 3:16. And all the fat is the Lord's. I flipped back there, but I was looking up towards the top at like 4, 5, and 6. So yes, all the fat is the Lord's. Leviticus 3:16. Perfect. All right. Hey, God bless you guys. Have a great day. It's youth tonight. Send your teens my way. Spanish study tonight. You know, if you've got Spanish-speaking friends or family in the lower valley, you know, even if you're not a big Spanish speaker, maybe you could take them and they'd go with you if you took them along and say, hey, come with me to a Bible study. And they can get a Spanish Bible study. So there you guys go. God bless you guys. Take care. And I will see you guys tomorrow morning.